All right, so now we're going to bring in our ambient occlusion map and our curvature map. And you can start a new document if you want to, and just start from scratch at 2048 by 2048 because that's what our maps are. The one thing you do want to do for this, because we're going to be using a normal map or a bump map, is you want to bring this to 16-bit. When you set this up for color mode, if you do it starting from scratch, if you already are bringing in something you've already been working on, you want to make sure the first thing you do is come up to image mode and come down to 16 bits if it is 8, or if it's at 32, bring it down to 6 as well, 16 as well. So I'm going to make this 16 bits. That's when we make the bump map. We're not, and we have to convert it within Maya. We have to make it a raw image read, and if it's 8 bits, the color information is not going to be as nearly as much, and you're going to get like artifacts on your bump maps. So we're going to start off with converting this to 16-bit bits per channel. So now it's 16-bit, and our bakes that come out are in fact 32 bits. So if you start just dragging those into Photoshop, remember to go into the mode and take them down from 32 to 16. So we're not going to have that problem because we're just going to bring straight them in, and it's going to automatically convert those. So I'm going to bring in my ambient occlusion. I'll hit enter. I'll go in and grab my curvature map. I'll hit enter. And then I'm going to bring both of these into my crate folder below my wireframe. And first things first is we can just use these as is to start making our model kind of pop. So for the ambient occlusion, if I'm going to use this to bring out the shadows and not have the white parts show up. So I can use a blending mode for that by going into normal, multiply, and you can see it's letting the white parts through. And I can even fine tune this a little bit, bring it down if I don't want it to be that obvious, maybe something like 70. And then for the curvature map, I can turn this on. You can see it's the inverse of this. So I'm going to go in and use, instead of a darkening blending mode, a lightening one. And I can go to something like screen or even color dodge. I guess for this, I think I'm going to go with color dodge because it's just, normally I would go with screen, but for this, and then I'll bring this down to something like 60. And it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that. And then I'm going to save this out. As a JPEG 2. And we can see what exactly this is doing. So I'm going to save this out, go back over to Maya. And what I've done is I put in a directional light, and instead of having a sky dome, and you can see this is what the kind of light sources you're going to probably get more within Maya. And you see how flat it makes, like if you don't have any ambient occlusion going on, look how fake and flat this this model looks. So this is the old color map we have without any of the ambient occlusion or curvature maps applied to it in Photoshop. So I'm going to come over to AI standard surface. I'm going to go ahead and rename this crate M for material. And I'm going to come over here to my color. And I'm going to change out my old color map with my color 2. Right, and you can see it's a little much. I'm going to go back in and tone it down a little bit, but you can see there's highlights on the edges. In the shadows, there's like, it's darker. And it's just already looking better. Now it's kind of extreme, so I can just go back in there and tone these down, but it's not flat. It's got, it's popping a little bit, so that's kind of what we want. So you can go back in and kind of fine tune these a bit if you need to. And you can rasterize these. You don't have to be stuck with what you've rendered out, right? So if I go in and let's say duplicate this, just so I can, if I need to come back to it, I can increase the the curves on this and get a more dramatic look. So let me save that and then do the same thing, bring it to color dodge, bring it down a little bit, something like that. Then save this out, and then let's come into my crate, do the same thing on that. Let's just bring this down a bit to 40. Yeah, that's looking good. And let's just see. So it's the exact same kind of iteration. Make it a JPEG. Save that. It's got to get a copy. And then let me come back into my and go for my copy and let this update. There we go. So then, because I applied some curves, you can see that the edges, right, are a little bit more sharp, a little bit edgy, more edgy, and then the shadow information isn't quite so pronounced. But look how subtle that is, and way more, detailed than the first one. So you can just, this already is a huge improvement. But what else can we do with these maps? All right, let's go back into Photoshop. I'm gonna just go ahead and delete this layer. And so what we can do with these is I'm gonna duplicate both of these, my AO and my curvature, and then I'm gonna take off color dodge and normal, and then I'll take off multiply, bring it to normal, and make this 100. So I can turn this in. Let me turn off bottle. So I can use this information to make a mask within Photoshop to apply grunge. So I'm going to go in and scratches. So the first thing I'm going to do is go in and I went and just got some seamless textures. Okay, and I'm going to use this one for grunge, this metal one, and I'm going to drag it and bring it up here, and I'm just going to drop it down, and you can see it's kind of metallic with some cuts on it, just overall grungy. I'm going to grab this, and I want to turn this into a pattern. So I just brought it in as a separate project. I'm going to hit edit with this because I've selected it with this rectangle, and then I'm going to come down to edit define pattern, and I'll call this metal 1 just because that's the name of the picture. And now it's in there, and it's in your pattern layer styles. So if I come over here and double click in this layer, come down to pattern layer, you can see you can start building up a library of textures down here. So now I can use that. I can close this out and I'm going to bring that in to this Photoshop document by simply clicking on create new layer, using the paintbrush or the paint bucket tool, and just filling in. It can be any color, it doesn't matter, because we're just going to come right over here and say pattern overlay, and we're going to just leave this as is. Now the good thing about this is I can scale it down, and since it's a seamless texture and we made it a pattern, it'll just automatically tile. I'm going to bring it down to something like this, and then I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this so I can start using this in conjunction with this curvature map. I'm going to also go in and really drive up the contrast of this. So something like that. And then I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to turn it black and white. Maybe this will allow me to play with some of the values as well. Something about like that. So this is going to be my scratch grunge on my curves. So now I can go to my curves and I'll deselect everything to where it's only my curves showing. And I can now go into my channels and be able to select one of these channels. Since it's a black and white image, the red, green, and blue channel are all the same. If I add this bottle, you can see, right, that now that's in this channel. So that's why when you're doing this, you just want your curvature map showing. And so I'm going to grab my curvature map, so it's the only thing showing up in the channels. I'm going to grab, it doesn't matter, I can grab any of these, and I'm going to come down to this little circle that says load channel as selection. And when I click it, you can see this zebra pattern is forming all over this curvature map. And so if I come back to layers and then come back to the little scratch pattern that I was making, I can click on add mask, and now it is now cutting out everything that was in the darker areas and leaving everything that was in the white areas. So now all the scratching and everything is in the place of where the white part is for this curvature. See that? So I can go in and make this, I'll go ahead and apply this layer mask to where it's all just here. And I can play with this as well. I can go and say color dodge, right? And now instead of just having a generic color here, if you look, you can see there's like a subtle pattern in here where that scratch texture was. So now where the edges are going to be, it's not just going to be just a lighter color. It's going to actually show scratches on this part. So that's what we want to do. And now we're going to do the same thing for the shadows here. So I'll actually bring this down a bit. Something about like that, 70. Okay, so now this is going to be what we use instead of our curvature, because this is the curvature that's the curvature masked out that scratchy texture, and we're going to use that instead. So you know what, I can probably leave it all the way up. So this is going to kind of be the same thing. So I'm going to do the same step with the ambient occlusion. But I'll pick a grungy texture to do that on. So here's my ambient occlusion. I'll bring my new curvature, texture down here. And then I'm going to grab my ambient occlusion here and do the same thing. Oh yeah, I got to make the fill layer. So here's my fill layer. I just came down here. I'm going to use a paint bucket tool. Right, and on this one, I'm just going to grab a different pattern. I already pre-made some, so you're just going to have to do the same step that we did to make this one. And instead of choosing this or this, I'll choose. Let's see. I'll choose this. Kind of grungy. I think it's rust, but it looks kind of grungy. And then I will rasterize this layer, and now that it's locked in, I'll turn that layer off. And with my ambient occlusion, I can go back to my channels again, pick any of these, come down to this little circle, select it, and it'll have all of these selected. I'll come up to my layers, and then I'll get this texture again, this texture pattern, and mask that with this selection that is this ambient occlusion. So I'll apply that, and you can see, right, it's cutting out all the white parts here of this ambient occlusion. And we don't want that. We want the white parts to be left alone, and we want the darker parts to show through. So for this, we're going to invert this. So now we're going to go double click on our mask. So I just came over here to our ambient occlusion mask, double clicked on it. I'm just going to hit invert. And now in all of the little areas where the shadows are, instead of having just shadows, we have this grungy little texture pattern, and I'll hit OK. And now I'll apply that mask, and these are the only things I need right now. Is I got my shadow information here, I got my oh yeah, I don't need this either. This is my ambient occlusion map. So I got my shadow information that has now been masked with that seamless grunge texture. I have my details of my edging that is not just the curvature map anymore, but a curvature map that is masking that scratched metal. So now this is a much more complicated texture. So I'm going to save this out. We'll see how this looks. Just save it as color 3, I guess. And now I'll go apply this in Maya. And we'll see what it looks like. If Maya doesn't crash. Okay. Now, right, much better. It's not just shadow information there. It's got a little bit of grungy buildup. But look at the edges, right? It's not just a uniform line going down. It's, it's got a little bit of variation there, right? It's starting to look a whole lot more real. Instead of just a uniform line around there, right? We see a little bit of a scratch here and then not so much there and more scratches here. Inside, right, we can see the grunge kind of building up. So this is what we want. This is a whole lot better than, and then if we wanted to, we could still lay over the ambient occlusion and curvature maps, like over this, and blend all of these together if we wanted to. So, but what else can we do? All right, so now that we have this, right, I can use what I already have here to create a specularity roughness map and a bump map or a normal map. So I'm going to go ahead and do the normal map first. So I'm just going to duplicate this group, right? And then I'll merge this entire group. And then for my to see what my normal map is going to be, I'm going to turn this into a black and white image. So I'm going to go into black and white adjustment. And anything that is white is going to stick out. Anything that is dark is going to be kind of pushed in. Anything that is gray is going to be kind of neutral. So I'm going to go and raise. I want the Kirin logo to look like it's been painted on. So it's going to barely be sticking out a bit. And then everything else can look like it's kind of cut in. So I want everything like that to be like that. And all this looks good. Let's see. Actually, the grunge would be built up. The cuts would be cut in. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to bring this down a bit to where it's like that. And then I'm going to invert this. We're just going to image, invert. And now the grunge is going to look like it's built up. The edges are going to look like they're being cut into. This is still going to be raised up from this part, and then the grunge is still going to look built up. Yeah, so this is going to be my my bump map. I'm going to just go ahead and save this as bump, because there's two kinds of bump maps we can do. And then I'm going to duplicate this again, and with this bump copy, I'm going to make a normal map. So you can add the illusion of 3D by using a bump map, which is a grayscale image, or a normal map, which is what we're going to do now. If you go up into Photoshop, hit Filter, go to 3D, generate normal map. And this, instead of being a grayscale image, is going to be a red, green, and blue image. It looks like it's very purple. And this is going to give us light information. So on this, I'm just going to leave the default settings as is. That's good. So you can see what it's going to look like. So you can see how it's making this sphere look like it's 3D. I'm just going to leave that as is. Click OK. So we got our normal map. We got our bump map, and then the last thing I want to do is make the specularity map. So I'm going to duplicate this group. I'll bring this kind of up here to where we can see, and I'm going to merge. Before I merge, so I was merging this whole group and then going in and using the adjustments. You can, because these are all layers, you can also go in and individually kind of adjust these to get the kind of desired effects you want. So I know my rust area is going to be extremely, I want it to be very rough to where there's almost no shininess at all. So I'm going to go into this single layer and go to adjustments, go to black and white, and then crank up the red, crank up the white to where this is very, very bright, because I don't want any of this to really be seen. So I'll hit OK on that, and then the same thing with the cuts and everything. This is already good. I just don't want them to be. They're not going to be shiny. So I'm going to leave that as is. This is the ambient occlusion. I don't need that, so I'll take that completely off. The logos, I'm going to combine all of these, and then I'll go into adjustments, black and white, and I'll take the red down to, let's see, I want it to be dark gray. I want it to be kind of shiny, so something about like that. I can adjust it later if I need to. And then the yellow, I'm going to bring this down the same way. Let's see, I want it to kind of be shiny, except for the little nooks and crannies. So this is going to be my specularity map, my specularity roughness map. I'm going to hit OK. So for this, I'm going to save this as spec, create spec JPEG. For this, I'm going to save this as normal, save as, in RML, and I'll save this as a TIFF because I need it to be higher quality. Did it save? Sorry about that. I'm going to go into TIFF. Whatever, okay. Save that as a TIFF. And then for my bump, I'm going to save this as, I'll just save this as a PNG. No, I'll save this as a TIFF as well. You can see, and I'll embed that off. You can leave it. Okay, so that's what we got. We got our bump, we got our crate, we got our normal. So let's go back into Maya and see how we're going to apply these. All right, so we have our color that's looking good. So what more can we do with? And we used these ambient occlusions and this curvature map to do a bunch of cool things, and let's see what it looks like in the end. So I'm going to go to specularity, and I'm going to crank this up. If I kind of come around, you should be able to see. Bring that up a bit. All right, so you can see how shiny this is. So we're going to be applying this to the roughness. I'm going to hit the little checkered mark. I'll hit File. I'm going to go find my specularity roughness map and apply it. And then I'll come into my hypershader. And what it's done is use my alpha, because Maya is stupid. It's using my alpha instead of my color channel. So I'm going to grab, we got to go in and And it also always takes these, I don't know why it inverts. It always puts the bottom nodes on top. It's really annoying. Get that figured out, Autodesk. So I'm just going to drop down this, bring my red into my specularity, and now you can see, right, the letters are extremely shiny. The edges are not nearly as shiny. And then the white little area is not nearly, or the yellow area isn't nearly as shiny as the red area. So to fine tune this even more, since we have that, you know, pretty good map already, we can just use an AI range to fine tune it. So I'll bring my color, plug my color into the AI range, bring my red channel into the specular roughness, and then tweak this accordingly. And to get a good sense of how this is looking, we'll bring up our renderer, Arnold, options, and then we'll go into render, debug, shading, isolate selected. So right now this is what this looks like, so I know that this let me bring down the overall weight a little bit to, like, the crate is definitely not that shiny. Something about 0.25. Okay, so this is looking pretty good as is, but we can dial we can make this a little bit more extreme. So with our AI range selected, I'm going to bring out the whites over here a little bit, and then maybe make this a little bit less dark. And it's just all, you know, you got to just kind of experiment with things. Okay, that's looking a lot better. See how it looks like it's painted there, and the yellow is not really that shiny. I think the yellow isn't shiny enough, and then the edges are not shiny at all, and then in between the edges it is. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit more. There we go. All right, so now the crate is, right, getting some good detail there. You can see in the corners up here where that noise was, it's making it, you know, roughening up more in some areas, not in other areas. And then the separation between the letters, right, the letters are pretty glossy while the rest of it is not. So I'm gonna be, you know, I could go in there and tweak all day, but this is pretty good. I'm gonna just leave it as this. And then let's apply our normal map. So I'm going to go down to geometry and go to bump mapping, and I'm going to choose file. And then if you go this automatic route, you need to make sure that we go into color space and change that to raw. That's why we went and did that 16 channels within Photoshop, you know, right away. And now I'm going to load my normal map. We can use this. If you're going to use a normal map, I would suggest using the AI normal map and plugging your color value into the input, and then not bothering with Maya's bump 2D, and then bringing your out value into the normal. This is Arnold's preferred method to do this. So I would do that instead. And then you can go in and adjust things with that. So I'm going to bring this down to like 0.282, and you can see, right, we're getting this illusion of depth here. We got these little bumps that are coming up in the areas over here where the grit is building up, and in the box down here you can see there's, you know, just little bumps being raised up wherever we put that little gritty texture. So then you can use the normal map if you want to. I don't really like to use the normal maps that much. If I'm you know, they're good for games and everything, but but I don't like how they distort things too much. So this is why I went ahead in Photoshop and did the other bump map. So I'm gonna go in and leave this alone. I'm going. Just crashed on me. I'm going to go ahead and use Maya's default bump map with just the grayscale image that I made. So I'm going to grab my Create M material, come back down to geometry, hit the bump mapping again, hit the file, and then just leave everything as is. But instead of choosing the normal map, I'm going to choose my bump map, which is just that grayscale image, to do the bump mapping on it. I will change this to raw, and then I'm going to hit play. You can see it comes out a lot more harsh, but it's straighter and it's not as distorted. So when I come down in here and dial this down, right, you can see. And I just like it. It's a nicer look. I can bring this down even more to 0.68. All right, so now we see texturing in the letters. We see fine texturing along the plastic. We've got a great specularity map. You know, if we were to add, and we could still go in there and tweak things, right? It's a little shiny. But just to show you kind of how to use these things, this is how you would go about doing that. If we bring in a physical sky, right, and rotate it around, this is starting to, you know, it's a drastic improvement. We come over here, we see the logo over here a little bit raised, right? We're seeing the nitty-gritty bumps everywhere. It's got some kind of life to it, some kind of imperfection, some texture. So this is how you would go about using that. The ambient occlusion baking and the curvature baking, and then putting a normal map on or a bump map on. And then within Photoshop using, you know, just your color channels to produce a grayscale image for anything that you want. So once you know how a specular roughness map works, you can tweak it there. If you know how a bump map works, you can tweak it there. And you can also use your curvature and your AO maps to help you mask stuff. So that's kind of the benefit of all this. All right, that's it.